This guy calls in Brian from Michigan. Brian asks, Mr. Adair, I read in The Nation that if you add up the fact checks for the Washington Post and PolitiFact, that Republicans lie more. Is that true? And I said, we don't keep score. I was lying. We did keep score, and I knew that Brian was right, but I lied to Brian because I didn't want to suggest that I was not impartial.
Hey folks, just sliding into the Michael Steele podcast. So glad you could be with us. I'm really happy to have you part of this Bulwark network enterprise. We have so much fun here. Really excited about this conversation. I'm excited about a lot of our conversations, but there's some that just kind of get to the nub of what ails us and sort of identifies the root cause of some of the problems we have. Lying is a big problem right now in American politics. And my guest today is Bill Adair. He is the Knight Professor of the Practice of Journalism and Public Policy at Duke University and the director of Duke Reporters Lab. His awards include the Pulitzer Prize for National Reporting and the Everett Dirksen Prize, which is no slouch of a prize, by the way, for distinguished coverage of Congress. He is the founder of Politifact. You're familiar with Politifact, I know. The go-to spot for journalists and political observers to fact check those lies and truths that are out there. And is the author of the new book that we're going to get into, Beyond the Big Lie, The Epidemic of Political Lying, Why Republicans Do It More. Yeah, they do. We do. And how it could burn down our democracy because there are real consequences from the lies we tell. I'm excited to have Bill as part of our conversation today. Take a break real quick, go grab something maybe a little stiff for some of this conversation. You may need it. Sit back and relax and enjoy Bill Adair here on the Michael Steele podcast coming up right after this. Hey, everybody, welcome to the Michael Steele podcast. Michael Steele here with you. And my buddy Bill Adair is here in the house to talk about his great book that's out. Look, I mean, there are instruction manuals and then there are manuals that give you real big clues. Beyond the Big Lie is that book. I'm so happy to have you here, man. It's great to see you again.
Well, thanks for having me. I hope it's not an instruction manual on how to lie.
No, it's
But
not that. No.
I
Instruction
did.
manual to understand what the lie is.
There you go. There you go. Yeah, it's great to be on talking to you again. Of course, you're in the book a few times, including a great story that you told when I was interviewing you. So we can talk about that and some other things.
Yeah, no, I'm excited, man. Look, it's the subtitle in the book, I think, really kind of gets us to where we find ourselves today, the epidemic of political lying, and that aspect of how that influences our everything we do now. It defines relationships that it otherwise never did before. It creates narratives around things that didn't happen. And it's really instructive, I think, in many respects, this idea that there's the white lie that your mama used to tell you about and you get your behind whipped for, right? You get in trouble for. But then this is just a whole nother level of political discourse. But for you, it all began in this journey into this area. This study began with a little thing called PolitiFact, and the idea was, these bitches out here lying. Somebody got to call them out, right? That's how we take it on the street. But talk to me before we really get into the meat of Beyond the Big Lie, the origin story of PolitiFact and why what struck you to say, you know what, someone needs to start charting this?
Sure. So I had been a political reporter in Washington. I'd been covering the White House and Congress at that point for probably about 6, 7 years, and had um, felt some guilt that we weren't fact checking the way we should. Now, fact checking had been around. I got to Washington in 1997. And fact checking had been around since the early 1990s, but it had kind of petered out.
Right.
What happened was there was this pushback, particularly from the Republican Party, that led fact checking to sort of lose its teeth. And fact checking became just another form of, on the one hand, on the other hand, journalism. There was, by 2003, 2004, there was a little bit of a resurgence. In 2003, factcheck.org got started, which was a very good fact-checking site from the University of Pennsylvania. But there still wasn't a lot. And I started to think, I want to do this, and I'll bet I could do it in a more creative way. So I was then the Washington bureau chief for the St. Petersburg Times,
Hmm.
great newspaper from Florida, would later become the Tampa Bay Times. And so I remember watching the speech in 2004 by Zell Miller, who was then a Democratic senator from Georgia, gave a speech at the Republican
Oh
convention.
yeah, remember it well. Yeah,
Remember that? And he was like
yeah.
fired up, and he was like, John Kerry um couldn't um defend this country, and he made all these strong claims. And I just remember thinking, he's saying a lot of stuff that's not true, but I didn't do anything to fact check it. I was writing another story that night about Vice President Cheney. And so that kind of hung with me that I should have done more. So eventually I went to my editors. I did a few fact checks on climate, and kind of got a feel for the genre,
Hmm.
and then went to my editors and said, "Hey, for the 2008 election, let's start a fact-checking website, but let's do it differently. And instead of just writing plain articles, let's use a truthometer, and let's rate these claims from true to false, and have the candidates compile report cards. And that way you could look at a candidate's record, and you could see how many true ratings they'd gotten, how many half true, etc." So my editors loved the idea. There wasn't any even like, real serious debate about it. And so they let me do it, gave me a couple of reporters to work with me, and off we went. This was in 2007. And it did well. Our coverage in 2008 won the Pulitzer Prize for national reporting. It led to copycats, which was great. There
Hmm.
were other websites that got started that did similar things. It spawned really a movement around the world. Led me to eventually to found the International Fact Checking Network, which is the global association of fact checkers. So it was a really great moment for fact checking. But along the way, I sort of hid the truth. I sort of buried the lead, which was when people would ask the question, the inevitable question, which party lies more? I would duck that question, like most fact checkers do.
And why did you duck it? Why would you duck the answer to an essential part of the political discourse equation? Both parties are out there telling us stuff. We consume that stuff. Why wouldn't you tell us that the stuff we're consuming is bad for us?
Um, I know it's crazy now. When you think about it, it's like, why didn't I answer that question? But I got asked it all the time, in speeches, in TV interviews, and I would just, duck it. So I I didn't answer it because to do so would, I felt, compromise my neutrality as a political fact checker. Because
Right.
if I revealed the truth, which was and is that Republicans lie more, I felt that it would be uh, it would suggest that I was no longer impartial. Um, and and we needed the Republicans to come to the phone when we were trying to find out the facts behind their factual claims.
Right.
So, um, and I was not alone. Like, other fact checkers did and do the same thing. And it all came to a head for me in 2012. I was on C-SPAN, and um, I love C-SPAN, Washington Journal. People call in, and so this guy calls in, Brian from Michigan, on the Democratic line. Go ahead, Brian. And so Brian asks, Mr. Adair, I read in the Nation that um, uh, if you add up the fact checks for the Washington Post and Politifact, that Republicans lie more. Is that true? Uh, and I said, um, oh, Brian, we don't keep score. Um, that would be like asking an umpire who's out at home more, the Yankees or the Red Sox. I was lying. We did keep score. We kept score by individual, by a
Right.
politician. And I knew that Brian was right, but I lied to Brian because I didn't want to suggest that I was not impartial. But when I went to write this book, I left PolitiFact in 2020, and I'm now a professor of journalism at Duke University. When I left, I decided that I would come clean about this lie on C-SPAN. I believe, Michael, I'm the only person to ever lie on C-SPAN. So I want to say that up front, like, apologize to C-SPAN viewers.
Right.
I'm sure it's never happened
It's
before.
never happened
Yeah.
before. No, no,
Um,
not in the coverage of the House and Senate, not in no, at no time. You're
Never.
the only person to lie. Talk to me about the art of political lying. Because before we get into the who lies more,
Sure.
set up the narrative around that art form and what are the elements of political lying that makes it work the way it does.
Sure. So, and this was an interesting thing. One thing I realized as a political reporter and as a fact checker, that this is like the most common and in many ways discussed thing among political journalists, and yet we never ask politicians about it. Like, when you were chairman of the RNC, did anyone ever ask you, like, why do politicians lie?
No,
No.
no.
And I never asked that question ever even when I was editing PolitiFact. And it's weird because journalists don't want to ask that question. I think because they figure the politician will just deny it, or they don't want to talk about it, or it's uncomfortable, or whatever. So, but I did. So for this book, I asked politicians and political operatives, like, why do you lie? And of course, most of them were like, I don't lie.
I don't lie.
I've
Never
never lied.
lied in my life.
Yeah, exactly. So, uh, so what, and you were one of the few, like, what I loved in your story, and we'll get to it, like, you were like, well, let me tell you about when they tried to get me to lie.
Right.
Um, so why do politicians lie? So, the more I talk to people, the more I realize that the decision to lie is like a, a calculation of points, that a politician makes the decision, I am going to gain more points, so to
Hmm.
speak, from this lie than I'm going to lose. So, and it's almost like an instantaneous thing. Like you could see the numbers, like the Terminator, like
True.
in their eyeballs. Like, yeah, I'm gonna score enough here. I'll go ahead and lie. And um, so I do think there is a calculation, and it's easier now to lie for many politicians because districts are so gerrymandered. The media is so partisan that politicians don't have there aren't the sort of there isn't the friction that there used to be. So
Hmm.
when you represented a district that was more moderate, might have more voters from the other party, you would have to think twice about lying. Journalists might hold you accountable. There are fewer journalists today from local news organizations. So all those things are factors, I think, in the calculation to lie. So why do politicians lie? Number one reason, ambition. Like they decide that I am going to score points with my constituents by lying. It is going to help me in the polls in some way. It's going to help me in fundraising in some way. The fundraising thing surprised me. Like the extent to which politicians just use bald-faced lies in their fundraising
Yeah.
stunt. Like, and I guess I shouldn't be surprised by anything in this profession, but um, you know, I interviewed Anthony Fauci, and Fauci showed me some of these fundraising things that have been done about him, where they would lie about various aspects of his work on COVID, and then just shamelessly use it in fundraising appeals
Well,
because
it's
they
the grift. It's the correlation between the bigger the lie, the scarier the story that I'm telling you in that as a part of that lie, the more you're going to send me money. And not only are you going to send me money, you're going to send me a lot of money.
right.
And so once the parties figured that out, that became a staple for a lot of the things that you saw in terms of the production, and there is production around lying, that is just astounding.
Absolutely. And as Fauci told me, he's like, they have no shame. And I think, in a way, um, shame is gone. That was another phrase I heard from a fair number of people that um, they don't feel shame because of this partisan world that they live in, where it's a bubble. There's none of this. Uh, these moderating forces that would create friction about lying. So, and then, and then you have sort of different types of lying. And I also have a taxonomy of lying in the book. There's also the self-defense lie. Anita
Right.
Dunn, who was an aide to Biden, now helping Kamala, or running a super PAC campaign in support of Kamala. Anita Dunn said that she pointed out something interesting about Nixon, that Nixon didn't do a lot of lying about policy or even the Vietnam War, that it was when his back was to the wall and he needed to lie in self-defense. And so this was the self-defense lie that several people talked about, sort of, I've been accused of something,
Right.
I need to defend myself. I'm just gonna deny it. And of course, that's a pretty common type of lie.
It's fascinating, the elements that go into the art of political lying, and it really gets us to the core of the story you tell, and it's not one that should be surprising to anyone. I don't know why people feign, shock and clutch their pearls and hide under desks and run into closets in fear of the truth. Republicans lie, and they're damn good at it, and they're very effective with it. You note in the book, Republicans lied far more often, and they were ruthless and repetitive. Their lies often came directly from party talking points. I can talk to you about that in a moment. They scripted lines that elected officials use in speeches, share that story with you as well, and media appearances. Our PolitiFact fact checkers would notice the same lines, and here it is, folks. The same lines used over and over in cookie cutter campaigns in Wisconsin, Ohio, and Florida, and Georgia throughout the country. So let me just affirm everything that you write there. Every week we would have the senatorial meeting. I would sit in that meeting as the RNC chair, and I'm giving the report from the field, what's happening across the party on the ground in the grassroots, what the RNC is doing. Mitch McConnell and Cornyn and others in leadership would get up, and then they would, go around the room and start sort of getting a feedback. And then there would be, okay, who's on shows this weekend? Meet the Press, Face the Nation, and they outline. And there would be the script. Here's what we're saying about Obamacare. Here's what we're saying about this military issue or this social issue, and it would be consistent. And you could literally flip from program to program to program, no matter who was on, and you would hear the exact same words. The exact same words. And I have to be honest, I admired the discipline. Irrespective of the lie that was being told or the shaving of the truth or the coloring of the facts, I admired the level of discipline it took, that no matter who you were, and this was the thing, Bill, that was not just on the national programs, but you would drill that bad boy down to your local TV station. That member, House, Senate, didn't matter. But it got better than that, my friend. Governors, state reps, all parroting the same narrative over and over and over again over those 2 weekends, over those 2 days of the weekend, primarily on Sunday. And you talk about the reinforcement of a lie or an exaggeration. That's how he did it. And so when I read that part where you said they were ruthless and repetitive, I just had flashbacks to meetings in which that was such a powerful element to it. And here's the backflip on that. The discipline, if you did not. The discipline, if you did not. There was one senator from the state of Massachusetts named Brown, who was one who very often did not play the game. Why? Because Massachusetts isn't South Carolina. And for a lot of the party leadership, it didn't matter what state you were. It didn't matter that a Republican in Maryland had a harder time spewing this bullshit than a Republican in the Deep South. And they never accounted for that and did not want to account for that. And that's the thread you see playing out today with Donald Trump. It doesn't matter which state you're in. It doesn't matter the circumstance. The narrative is going to be the same and everyone's going to stick to the lie.
So why is it that the Republicans are so much more disciplined? You use the word discipline several times there. I mean, I remember walking across the parking lot of the Capitol with Joe Scarborough when he was a Republican from Florida, and he had in his hand party talking points on whatever it was that day.
Right.
And we were talking about it, and I was like, man, you guys are so good. Why are the Republicans so much better at this than the Democrats?
Well, because I think in the main, a lot of it has to do with the orientation, that this sense of a connectedness around a number of issues that represent what we believe or what we want to do. And I think if I'm going to be honest in the timeline, it's going to go back to how a lot of this started in the first place. the emergence of Newt Gingrich in the late 1980s, and certainly the takeover of the House in 1994. Um, there in order to defeat the political enemy in front of you, you had to develop a strategy, and that strategy had to be um, concise, and it had to be unified and unifying. In other words, I need to get everybody on point about this particular line of attack. And so when you started seeing success from that, everyone started to buy into it. And so when you go back to when Newt first started this idea of taking the House, and the members at that time were like, okay, he high. I don't know what they're smoking in Georgia, but it's I don't think that's going to work. But he had a discipline that the Mavericks who were with him, and there were very few. He didn't come in there like, okay, here we go, we're going to go save the day. No, it was a very difficult thing. He still had to contend with the Joe Scarboroughs and others who weren't wholly bought into all of this, as we would find out later when they usurped his power and threw him out. Um, but he very, very methodically and carefully scripted the narrative around why this was important, and why, if you say it over and over and over again, it will become fact. It will become the thing. It will become true. And people will believe it, and people will want it to happen. Right. And he was very effective at that. And he convinced the caucus. You go back and look at the tossing out of Jim Wright, the then Speaker of the House, around the post office scandal and other scandals that the Democrats were caught doing, where the primacy of the House was keeping that kind of stuff quiet. And Newt exposed that, and in exposing that, set narratives to it. This is why Washington doesn't work. Put us in power, give us the power, and we're going to make it work better. Here's our contract with America. We promise to do these 10 things. And so all of these narratives became part of that story. And when it started to work, people liked it, they believed it, and then you could say anything.
Absolutely.
And so what you strike at in the book is that part of it. And I understand why you write. I felt it was important to show we were nonpartisan, and I believe revealing the party totals would undermine that fact. You talked about, looking at the tracking that you were doing and saying, "Oh, wow, Republicans are lying a lot more than Democrats." You felt the commitment to objectivity was more important than telling which side lied. But did you find out that, in fact, that undermined the very thing that you were trying to do, keeping that away from folks?
Yeah. And it was funny because the people who actually revealed it were conservative critics. And so starting in like 2010, um, uh, some bloggers and a communications faculty member at George Mason University did some very basic math and added up some fact checks. I think in each case, maybe 100. And we're like, wow, PolitiFact gives a lot more false ratings to Republicans than Democrats. And uh, and their implication was, and they tried to make this seem scholarly, so they didn't go too hard on the selection bias angle, but their implication was selection bias. Um, and I looked upon it as, well, thank you, conservative scholars, for revealing the truth. But they looked at it as, look at how biased these fact checkers are. And so that that was sort of the beginning of the reveal in a way.
Right.
And but we stayed away from it at PolitiFact. We didn't comment on those studies and I continued to dodge the question while I was editor. And I left PolitiFact in 2013 to come here to Duke. I continued to do work with setting up PolitiFact North Carolina here, but I still didn't venture into this um, uh, question until after I left PolitiFact in 2020. Um, but to answer your question, I was hiding an important truth.
Yeah.
And the fact that there is this huge disparity, Republicans lie a lot more. And we can't deny that. And to say it's bias is wishful thinking. Um, and I don't think any reasonable person would look at our political discourse and say, "Oh no, Democrats lie more." Like it's just they don't. And fact checkers look high and low to find um, false things the Democrats say because they're under all this pressure that they're allegedly biased. And it's just, it's really a problem for our country that Republicans lie so much more.
And,
So,
and it's in a particular problem because they hold one chamber of the House, could potentially hold the White House again. And the guy that they are rallying around takes lying to a whole new level of depravity and offensiveness and danger that I think the country, I'll be honest, is ill-equipped to deal with. It is a level of sophistication in its orchestration and repetitive nature that I'm just stunned at the people that I know who are supposedly some really smart people who actually wind up being dumb as a bag of bricks when it comes to the bullshit they hear coming out of Donald Trump's mouth. And they sit there and repeat back to me in with a level of cogency and integrity that this is factually true. And I would go, you are an idiot because this is not true. And it is something I encountered long before Trump showed up with Barack Obama and birtherism.
oh,
And
yeah.
we'll talk about that. We're going to take a quick break because I want to get into, I pulled back the curtain a little bit with you a moment ago. We'll pull it back a little bit more, but I want you to pull back some too on what you heard from political operatives in their confessions and the various, aspects of the patterns that we see in the lying that maybe folks can start to pay a little bit more attention to and see the lie before it slams upside the head. I am talking with my man, Bill Adair. He's got a great book out, folks, Beyond the Big Lie, The Epidemic of Political Lying, Why Republicans Do It More, and How It Could Burn Down Our Democracy. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to peel back that curtain a little bit more with Bill Adair. Hey, folks, Michael Steele here. And as we're witnessing what could be the most important political contest of our times, many of us are also witnessing some amazing sports contests each week. And that's why I want to talk to you about Prize Picks. Now, Prize Picks is the best place to get real money sports action every week. With over 10 million members and billions of dollars in awarded winnings, Prize Picks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to everyone. You just pick more or less on at least two players for a shot to win up to 100 times your cash. Now, Prize Picks is the best way to get action on sports in over 30 states, including California, Florida, Georgia, and Texas. Sign up today and get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. Prize Picks is the best way to win real money this football season. Which players are going off? Which ones aren't? You make your picks in less than 60 seconds and turn your sports opinions into real money all season long on Prize Picks. One of my producers, Beowulf, tried Prize Picks the other day for the first time. He'd never played this kind of game before. Guess what? He won over $250 the very first time he tried Prize Picks. You should try it too. Download the app today and use code STEELE to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's right. Play $5 and get $50 free instantly when you download the Prize Picks app and use code STEELE. One more time. Download that Prize Picks app and use code STEELE. Prize Picks. Run your game. Welcome back to the Michael Steele podcast here on the Bulwark Network. I am so glad that we have Bill Adair in the house. He's got a great book, Beyond the Big Lie, The Epidemic of Political Lying. Let's just get into that period where the political lying took on a whole different form and fashion, where the politicians moved off of they want to take away your Social Security. Oh, they're going to bankrupt Medicare.
Yeah, I know.
Two,
Those lies seem almost innocent now,
oh
don't
my God, they're like little baby white lies. They're just
they?
like
Yeah.
little baby teeny things. To the point where it became personal. It became a way of framing your political opponent, of taking down your political opponent, not on policy, but on their person. And no more did we see that become an art form than with Barack Obama and his birth certificate. And the genesis of that around his race, I think, was a big factor in animating a lot of that. Yes, he was a Democrat. I think that was just kind of like a small cherry on the side. Um, but the racial piece became an easy target because you didn't have to really call it race or talk about race when you could just euphemistically refer to him being from outside the country. Well, he's a black man. Yeah, he's not from here. Or because his father was African. Oh, see, there you go. Kenya. Just pick a shithole country in Africa, to quote the former president. Um, what was so stark and telling in your writing these stories and looking at that aspect of political lying that struck you? And how did you feel about it when it struck you?
So this one I was in the middle of because I was editor of Politifact at the time, and we saw this one come up sort of through the conservative media ecosystem, and it gave me what even today is sort of my working theory about how lies begin, and I think they begin um, uh, like blades of grass that sort of emerge from the ground, and the strong ones survive and grow bigger, and then in this the life cycle metaphor doesn't quite work here, but the they become bigger plants. And if they're good enough to survive. And so this one went from being pushed by really fringe characters in the conservative world, bloggers and a fringe candidate, and then got picked up by prominent people, Donald Trump, and that gave the birther lie new credibility, and suddenly now it's being talked about in talk radio, it's being talked about on Fox, and the fact checkers began to take notice. Now we took heat for this. The Obama campaign was trying at the time to be dismissive about it and was like, don't take it seriously. We're not gonna give it any oxygen. And they were trying to get us not to write about it. And I remember having arguments with the Obama person who was assigned to the fact checkers, like, and Tommy Vitor, who's now at John Favreau's podcast.
Mm-hmm.
And they were like, don't give this thing credit. And I felt like they should respond, and I felt like as a fact checker, I wanted to respond. But they were slow in responding. And later, Valerie Jarrett would say, we made a mistake by not responding quickly and forcefully enough. So that gave it this momentum. Trump was big on it, of course. And I remember going on Chuck Todd's show. Now, this was after Trump was elected, and Trump was after Obama was elected, and Trump was still pushing it. And I remember going on Chuck Todd's show, Daily Rundown on MSNBC, and Trump called in to Chuck Todd to try to discredit me, just telling Todd what a lousy person I was before the segment to try to like undermine me. Even though I didn't know Donald Trump and I don't know where he got any information on me. But it was an attempt, as Bob Bauer, Obama's personal attorney, now says, to portray Obama as the other.
Yep.
That
Yep.
he's black, he's he was really born in Kenya, even though it was so to me, like, the thing wasn't the birth certificate that convinced me. The thing was the birth announcement in 2 Honolulu newspapers. Like,
Right.
how do you falsify that? That. So anyway,
but here's the thing,
was,
Bill. But here's the thing about this part of all of this and why it works. I'll ask you first. Why does it work? I'll share with you why I think it works. I'm curious as to why you think why did that work?
well, people want to believe it.
Thank you.
I think,
Thank
yeah,
you.
I think people were looking for an excuse why they didn't want to, vote for this guy.
Thank you.
All right, now you've got to tell your story.
No, I am. I'm absolutely, because it's a perfect segue into the core of this. Folks, birtherism worked because you wanted to believe it. Not you. I'm not, okay, folks out here listening, but I'm saying all of the you collectively. There are folks in our community, in our neighborhoods, in our families, in our country that wanted to believe that Barack Obama, because he was a black man, was other. He was outside of us. And so anything that would confirm that and satisfy that itch that you had, that you otherwise couldn't reconcile, you latched on to like a bitch and you just wouldn't let it go. And that's why it stuck. And I remember a conversation I had with Donald Trump in 2013. We met in his office and he wanted to do some things. And I said, well, look, why don't you do an op-ed on the economy? You're a businessman. Let's do an op-ed on the economy. You talk about how you would shape the economy and da 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 da. And this wasn't even presidential aspiration stuff. None of that conversation was in play. This was just his wanting to figure out how he could, connect narratively to what was going on in the country. And I told him, I said, but the one thing you have to do in order for that to work is you have to drop this birtherism shit, because it doesn't work. It's just not, it's, first off, it's racist. Second off, it's not true. And I went through the laundry list of things. He said, yeah, that kind of makes sense. A number of people have been telling me that. And yeah, I really just one thing, I want to focus on the economy. I'm on the train home, Bill, get a phone call from Trump, and he says, you know what? I changed my mind. I'm going to stick with the birtherism because it works. Because it works. And he realized,
Michael, I have made the decision. I'm going to keep lying.
Yes, I've made the decision. I'm going to keep lying because it works. And the reason it works is because we believe it. And the reason we believe it is because we want it to be true. And that's how a TikTok, Twitter story about JD Vance and his couch takes off because people actually believe that about him, right? And so it's not just the one side, it's the other. So Bill had asked me to his class, and I was sharing with them the story about being an RNC chairman and the messaging that I was asked to do as national chairman. And the one thing that's very true, folks, is that the job is kind of cookie cutter in the sense that everybody wears a uniform, right? They all have the dark suit, the white shirt, the red or blue tie. That wasn't me. I got criticized because I wore a light purple shirt one time. I wore stripes. I had these wild colored ties. People freaked out. You should have seen the looks on their faces the day I showed up at a National Press Club presser with a maroon colored suit, black shirt, black tie. Oh, man, people were pissing in their pants. But that's so you got the uniform. Then you got the uniformity of message, which we were talking about before, Bill, where here's the talking points, right? Here's the list of things I need you to say. Okay, now we all just part one, part two, part three. So they came in and gave me, I was doing a speech, and in the speech, there was a section in which I'm talking about Barack Obama, and I'm talking about the fact that he wasn't born here, the birtherism bullshit, and leveling up these lies about Barack Obama. And I'm sitting there looking at this speech, and I'm looking at, I'm like, y'all want me to go read this? And I finally just look and say, y'all know I'm black, right? I I can't go out and say this shit to people. I gotta go home tonight. My Starbucks is in a black community. I don't go to the white neighborhood to get coffee. I get it across the street from my home. I'm gonna be standing in line with a whole bunch of black folks going to reading the Washington Post. I just said this about Barack Obama not being an American. How the hell you think I'm gonna get some coffee? Right? And it was this idea. They were like, well, what do you mean? I was like, why are we saying this is not true? I'm not perpetuating the lie. And more importantly, I'm not taking out another black man like that. I said, no, that's just not how this is going to work. Needless to say, that communications director didn't last long. But the reality of it is, anybody else in that role would have rolled out with those talking points and would have spewed that lie about Barack Obama from the pulpit of the RNC and made it gospel for the followers across the country, the rank and file Republicans. And that is a big part of the art of political lying, is not just the formation and crafting of the lie, but it's also the convincing of the lie, telling of the lie to get others to believe the lie. So you have to do it in such a way, and you have to have words artfully chosen, by the way, that make it that much more real. So people don't go, well, that doesn't sound right. Am I right?
Absolutely. And I think this is an example, and I have a few in the book where you really see when lies are so calculated. When, it's not like, and there are some lies that it's like spur of the moment, like I'm just going to lie right now. And I think Donald Trump does that a lot.
Right.
He did it this week. He was in Asheville, and he made the decision to repeat the lie about how the federal government is, not giving people the
Yeah,
aid they need.
right.
Yeah. So, and I think that's just a spur of the moment. It's not like that's scripted. Um, but um, but when there's a scripted lie like that, to me, that's really something. That it's like somebody sat down, paused, and wrote it. And like that's really
But
calculated.
it's happening all the time now. It's happening all the time now. Whether it's JD Vance in his speeches, it's Donald Trump in his speeches, that scripted part, and then that opens up the door for him to go down rabbit holes unforeseen to mankind. Um, you listen to Senate candidates, the Josh Hawleys and others out there standing in the well of the Senate lying. It's now part of the script, dude. I mean,
Yeah,
it's as
totally.
easy as breathing.
The one story in the book that I found a hope in, your Bulwark colleague, Tim Miller, um, is like you, someone who refused to lie. He was, well, after a bit. So he was working for the Romney campaign in 2012, and he had been put up before the cameras to lie about this thing called Orca, which was
I
a
remember. Yes.
computerized
Yeah.
handheld, like as an app that tracked the get out the vote effort by the Romney campaign, and it was a complete failure. The thing just crashed and burned. But Tim had to go out and sit before TV cameras and say, "Oh, the thing's working fine," and he was
Right.
like pulling it up on his phone, pretending, "Oh, it's looking good. Mitt's gonna win." Oh, this precincts in Colorado. And he was just lying and lying. And finally, he's like, "I can't do this anymore. I feel awful. I hate my life." And so finally, he just goes to his boss in the Romney campaign, and he's like, "I'm done. I can't lie anymore." And so
Yeah.
I just really admire that, that but when you dig back, like I found like in Politico, like Tim Miller says the thing's working great.
Right, exactly.
Um,
Yeah, exactly. And it's not. So that then leads to, why aren't there more repercussions for this? And let's open up the side door and really let the funk into the conversation. Social media and the role that social media plays in reinforcing the lie itself, which probably has a hand in why there aren't more repercussions.
Right. I think the answer to that, Michael, is it's up to us as voters. Like, we can decide if we care about this. If we go to our elected officials and say, "Hey, you're lying about this. That really bothers me." They will get a message after a while. It's like a restaurant. You get bad service, you complain to the manager. Eventually, the manager's going to be like, "Hey, I keep getting complaints about bad service. Maybe I need to make the restaurant better." And I think politicians get a message after a while. The problem, like we talked about earlier, is that there aren't enough people who care about these things because the politicians live in these protected bubbles. And the one other thing that has disappeared is there's less moments for accountability for these
Mm.
guys.
Hmm.
They don't have as many town halls anymore. They won't agree to debates. There's less availability to the news media. So, and I think journalists need to ask about this. Like, "Hey, you lied about that. What's the deal?" And so, but there are
And
fewer
why can't they just say that? I mean, this is the part I watch a presser whenever they happen with Donald Trump. And he will say something, and I just want the reporter goes, "Excuse me, Mr. President, that is a lie. And here are the facts. So
right.
why are you lying to people about that? Here are the facts."
Um,
Why?
you know,
I mean, look, because if you got an asymmetrical player in the game, you got to play the game asymmetrically. You cannot stand on conventional wisdom, nor can you stand on conventional practice. Meaning, you can't treat this bitch like he's the president of the United States, because he's not in that form, in that capacity any longer. And so, this idea, he's not George Bush and Barack Obama, in that they are still respectful of the institution that they once were a part of, and adhere to the common understanding of the role they should play as a former president, meaning they're not having offline conversations with Vladimir Putin. They're not out here telling people that, Haitians are eating your cats and your dogs. So why does the press not do that? I'm sure there's some editor somewhere scratching their head going, "Oh my God, no, don't do that." But at the same time, that's how you break the cycle, because I'm just wondering, how do you make political lying unpopular and unacceptable? Someone has got to call it out. Other politicians doing it doesn't work. You know why? Because no one believes them.
right. No, I'm with you, and I'd love to see more of it. I think one, we have to we this is not a useful exercise with Trump. Even Fox tried it over the weekend, and and he was like, they challenged him on eating dogs and cats, and he was like, I don't know, I read it somewhere, which interestingly is a different answer than he gave in the
Day
debate
before. So
when he
then the
said that,
question is, Mr. President, precisely where did you read it?
right.
Who wrote it? Who did someone in your office give you this? Where did you get that? And I
And
mean, that's the level of the way the game needs to be played, I think, in order to break the stranglehold that the lie has over the truth.
and haven't you read the 200 debunks that have been done about this that have indicated that you're lying? And yeah, I'd love to see a really good examination of Trump where he is questioned repeatedly about his lying, but that really hasn't happened. Time Magazine tried it some years ago, but really hasn't happened in the sort of um, detail that it
Right.
needs.
So
Um,
I so
but I'm
you
with you. I mean, I'd love to see that for all politicians.
I would too. I really wish they would. Look, I remember when I was a candidate running for the lieutenant governorship, when I was running for comptroller back in 1998, the Senate in 2006. The press was pretty damn dogged coming after me. If I mischaracterized something, they were all up in my grill about it. And yeah, part of it was I was a Republican in a very liberal bastion here in Maryland with a very left-leaning press corps. Fine, I get that, understand it, but the tenacity of following the truth and the holding the politician accountable for the truth. In my estimation, it all went to shit in 2015 and 16 when Donald Trump showed up and they realized this boy is bringing in the cash. Because I know people who would, send Donald Trump a text in the middle of a show to get him on the air. He'd come on and pop, there he is, right? Just dive bomb in. I knew we had turned a corner when the press would meet the press. The venerable Meet the Press did its interview because Donald Trump didn't want to come on and do it live in the studio like every other presidential candidate. He said, I would call in. He called in on Meet the Press and they accepted that. I would have been, nope, sorry, guess what? You just don't come on Meet the Press. But they wanted the story so bad because he was so good for ratings. He was such an entertainer. You never know what he was going to say next. Ooh, let's sit here with bated breath. And that is the opening, in my view, with the press. And they have not recovered. And then this mofo gets up and becomes president and calls them all liars and fake newsmakers after all of that.
I know it's troubling. Well, I do think any day we the media can get aggressive and start questioning not just him but all politicians, and um, start asking them about lying, start challenging them about lying, and turn the tide on this, because the media has incredible power to question them and hold them accountable, even in the current state of the media. So I think you're right. I think we could do more, and we really need to.
He is the founder of Politifact, the author of a great book, which I highly encourage. Folks, I don't bring folks on this podcast to just talk about some crazy ass book. This you get on here, it's because you got something good to talk about and for folks to read. The Big Lie, Beyond the Big Lie, the Epidemic of Political Lying, Why Republicans Do It More, and How It Could Burn Down Our Democracy. It's Bill Adair, folks, and he keeps it real. It's a great book. Um, the conversation we just had is just the tip. You're going to find yourself, I'm telling you, when you read the book, getting excited just as I was just now. I'm telling you, he's going to bring it out of you. You're going to find yourself yelling in your coffee, and your spouse is going to come in. Who the hell are you talking to? I'm just reading Bill Adair. He's pulling this out of me. It's a great book, Bill. Thank you for writing it, and thank you for sharing it, man, because I think it's important for people to understand the environment we're in, how it was created, why still works. And more importantly, as you were just noting, it's on us to break this cycle that we're in.
Thank you so much for having me, Michael.
Absolutely. All right, folks, follow Bill on Twitter at Bill Adair Duke, because he's at Duke University, of course. He's the Duke man. And certainly check out the Beyond the Big Lie. Get it where you get your books, and enjoy it. Download it. Do you have the audio version of the book too?
I do. Read by Jacques Roy from Simon & Schuster Audio. So that's an option. And also on ebook, on Kindle and Apple Books. So lots of options.
Super, super. Well, folks, check it out. I'm glad you checked out my conversation with Bill today. Certainly, I love it when you do the podcast thing, and that is download and like and all that good stuff. It makes me feel all yummy inside. Our podcast, as you know, is part of the Bulwark Network. We're so excited to be a part of this network now, going into our third month. It's so much fun. And continue to show the love, folks, out there, and get it right. Oh, and by the way, yeah, voting's underway, so get your ass to the polls and vote. Remember, the most important gift that our founders gave us is this wonderful thing we call democracy, America, Republic. Don't abuse it. Don't abuse it at the ballot box this November, folks, if you know what I mean. Y'all be good, be safe. Until next time, God bless.